Hi everyone, Mr. Steinmetz here, and I would like to share with you some information today about reading your child's ACT Aspire test results. We took the ACT Aspire tests last April in grades 3 through 8, and this is the first year we've done the ACT Aspire tests. And personally, I thought it was a pretty solid test, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But with that being said, a couple disclaimers. So with this being the first year doing the tests, and even though we did some practice tests online so the kids could get used to the formatting of it and what kinds of things they'd be asked on the test, the unfamiliarity of it might have somewhat affected the scores. So take that with a grain of salt. And also with some of them, typing proficiency may have affected it a little bit. The second disclaimer deals with grade levels. So in general, third grade and sometimes fourth grade even, their tests are full of variability because this would be their first time ever taking such a major test like this. So many of the third grade scores might be kind of off, and we like to see them after a couple years to see them kind of steady out and stabilize, and they'll start to balance out. Finally, as we go through this together, it would be beneficial for you as we go through this that you would be looking at your child's ACT Aspire test results report that you received. So with that being said, let's get started. When we took the tests in April, the kids took 5 different tests. They took the tests in the areas of reading, writing, English, math, and science. And those 5 tests were reported in 4 different reporting categories: English, reading, science, and math. Then there are separate scores for ELA, which stands for English Language Arts. Writing is included in the ELA score. The front of your report looks something like that, and it's got those graphs and charts and a lot of different data. And the back of your report looks something like that, and there is a lot of information that we're going to talk about on each side. But before we get into actual data analysis and looking at the reports, just a couple notes. First of all, like I said before, personally, I thought the ACT Aspire test was a very thorough test. For example, it was more than just multiple choice and things like that. There was multiple choice on it, but for example, even in the math section, there were constructed responses and written responses where the kids would have to justify their answers and explain their answers and things like that. The writing tests was actually writing, so it wasn't just answering questions about language or mechanics, it was actually writing. With all that being said, the ACT Aspire test, as well as any other standardized test, is still just one indicator of your child's academic progress. So while it's still thorough, it's still one indicator, and we can take that with a grain of salt as well and couple that with how your kid's doing in the classroom. When you're looking at these reports, the lowest score on all tests is a 400. They kind of scale it somehow. They have a formula for that. So the lowest score is 400, and the highest score is going to vary by both grade and subject. Third grade, the lowest high score is a 429. Up toward 8th grade, the highest high score is a 456. And that's why if you look at the graphs, those green bars generally start to shift up by grade level because those highest score levels shift from grade to grade. So with that being said, would you please go to side 1, the current progress, it says at the top right, and we'll start taking a look at that. So first of all, the charts, the graphs, the reporting categories are English, reading, science, and math. The first thing to look for, I believe this is only on the 8th grade reports, is the composite score. That's simply an average of all 4 of those categories. So if you add them all up and divide by 4, that would give you the composite score. So there's a lot of different things that this shows. A score is given for each area, as well as a descriptor of where your child is in comparison to what would be called the ACT Aspire readiness benchmark. That would be exceeding, ready, close, or in need of support. And we'll take a closer look at those ranges a little bit later as well. Under each chart, you can also see the ACT readiness benchmark. So for English, for example, the ACT readiness benchmark is a 422, and the national average is a 428. And it's interesting that in that case, the national average for English is higher than the ACT readiness benchmark. which means that as a whole throughout the nation, English is a stronger suit. But if we look at science, the ACT readiness benchmark is a 427 and the national average is a 424. So what that means is that's a pretty aggressive readiness benchmark. A couple things to look for. This is the kind of the chart or the graph key, if you will. You'll find that in the bottom right side of the front page. This kind of tells us what we can be looking for as we go forward. The readiness benchmark is on target and meeting grade level standards. That's anything in the green shaded area. The bar there, that's the ACT readiness benchmark for English language arts and also for STEM. We'll talk more about that. And then this orange dot as well as the orange cone is a predicted projection for where ACT Aspire would figure that your child would do in the coming years. I like to think of it kind of though like as the hurricanes on the Weather Channel. You see that cone of uncertainty. It's kind of where it could go, but it's not necessarily going to be in that range. It could go a little outside of it, but it's a pretty good indicator of a predicted path over the next couple of years. And then the national average is on there as well, and we'll talk about these more. So let's take a closer look just at this particular reading score. So there are a couple things to look for. First of all, the current score is how did they do on this reading test? They scored a 428. So if we look at the graph, there's the 428. It's within this ready range. So they are meeting that ACT readiness benchmark for whichever grade level for reading. The predicted path is this orange cone. So over the next 2 years, the prediction is that they would likely continue along in that ready path. The ranges would be from in need of support from 400 up to 410, and in 8th grade up to about 415. The close to the readiness benchmark, the ready portion, and then if they did quite well, they'd be in the exceeding portion. They're exceeding the ACT Aspire readiness benchmarks. So we can see exactly what is that benchmark at this grade level. This was an, I believe, an 8th grade result sample. The ACT readiness benchmark is a 424. This person scored a 428. The national average is a 423. So the national average is a little bit below where ACT Aspire would say you need to be at this point for readiness. The national average is a 3-year rolling average. So the previous 3 years of kids that took this test is how they form the average. So next year, the average might change from that. The year after, the average might change as well. Now, we've only done this for 1 year, so that's all your chart's going to look like. However, in future years, when we do this, it's going to look something like that. These gray dots are going to indicate where they did in previous years, as well as the current year, and that same cone as well. So we'll be able to have more of a longitudinal look at these results in future years, as well as a look at current progress, kind of all in one. So I really like that about how these test results are reported. If we keep looking now, a little bit farther down on the results page, you'll see ELA ready or readiness, English language arts, and you'll also see STEM readiness for science, technology, engineering, and math. So the English language arts score is a combination of their English reading and writing scores. And in this case, this particular individual meets the readiness benchmark for English language arts. So this little T thing, that black T thing, that indicates the ACT Aspire readiness benchmark. And one other neat thing about it is it's going to say either ready or below readiness, but we can see just how close to the readiness benchmark they are. So for example, in English language arts, they're meeting that readiness benchmark, but in STEM, they're below readiness benchmark for science, technology, engineering, and math. And we can kind of see how far below they are where a 420 would be compared to where readiness is. So if they were really close to readiness, we'd also be able to see that. In case you're wondering, these are the English language arts and STEM readiness benchmarks for each particular grade level in each particular category. So if we're looking at the 8th grade readiness, the English language arts readiness was a 427, they got a 430. The STEM readiness was a 433 for 8th grade, they got a 420. Not quite there, there's some work to do on that. With all that being said, the STEM readiness benchmark is a very aggressive benchmark. I want you to just take a look at these results. You can see that in science, this particular individual is in the ready range. And in math, this particular individual is in the ready range. But for overall STEM readiness, this particular individual is below STEM readiness. Like I said, it's not everything in science and everything in math, though. It's certain parts of science and certain parts of math that make up that STEM readiness benchmark. And it is very aggressive. So this person was ready in both, but not in STEM readiness. So as a whole, across the board, schools are seeing things like that where STEM in general is below readiness. So just a heads up on that. You'll also see something with progress with text complexity. Basically, on the reading test, there are a variety of different levels of texts and different complexities of texts, and it gives them a variety. And the different complexities of texts vary by grade level. The texts become more complex as we get into the upper grades, into the especially the 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. So that's just a checkbox. Are they making sufficient progress or are they not? You'll also see a spot for national percentile, which looks something like this. If we went back to this, for example, this 423, that's the score. That's compared just to the test and compared to the ACT readiness benchmark. The national average, however, or the national percentile, that's more comparative. That is comparative to all the kids that took this test within the past 3 years averaged out. So what a percentile means is, for example, look at reading, the 76th percentile. This 76th percentile for reading shows that this person scored at or above 76% of all the kids that took this test over the last 3 years. If you look at the science one, the 19th percentile would say that this person scored at or above 19% of the rest of the kids. Higher percentiles would be higher up comparatively. One final thing on that front side I'd like to point out to you is what we look at as the scale score range. Because there is some variability in the test, because we're taking this test on one day, there could be a lot of factors at play there. It could be maybe a kid's nose is stuffy and they have to blow their nose all the time. It could be they're not feeling very well. It could be their dog's not doing great. It could be they're excited about grandma's birthday party coming up after school. There are a lot of things that could be going on that the test does not account for. So this score scale range at the bottom left shows that if they would take this test again without any instruction, they'd probably score within that given range somewhere. So it allows for a little bit of variability. Let's look to side 2 where it says skill proficiency at the top. This side breaks down how your child did on different assessment areas on each test. This backside with all these results I think is just awesome because it gives us a really solid insight into what skills were assessed in each particular content area. And it also lets you know how your child did in each particular content area, as opposed to they were high in English and low in math. Why? Well, we can kind of see a breakdown of it. It looks something like that. And when we're looking at this thing, there are a couple things we want to look for. In each of these bars, let's look at reading, for example. If the left side of that bar is a dark orange, that means that the particular individual is ready or exceeding that particular area. So this person's got a good grasp on key ideas and details and craft and structure in reading. If there's light orange on the left side, that means they weren't quite at that readiness benchmark, that they were close or in need of support in that particular area. So you can see the number of questions on each particular category, 17, 10, and 4, as well as how many they answered. One other thing to point out is, what is that black bar all about? This black bar here, if that orange bar here is anywhere within the black area, that indicates readiness. So you see for key ideas and details and craft and structure, that orange bar is within the black bar. But for integration of knowledge and ideas, it's not quite there. We have those indicators for English, reading, science, and math, but not for writing. And there's good reason for it. Because writing, it's assessed in 4 different areas: ideas and analysis, development and support, organization, and language use and conventions. Like I said earlier, the writing test was just that. It was a lot of writing. For example, the 7th and 8th graders actually wrote an essay. I believe the 3rd and 4th graders wrote a story of some sort, a narrative. So it wasn't answering questions, it was actually doing legitimate writing. And it was assessed by scores that ACT Aspire contracted. In grades 3 through 5, the writing rubric they used was 5 points, and in grades 6 through 8, the rubric was 6 points. Now this looks terrible. 4 out of 6, 67%. On many grading scales, that's an F, but we need to keep in mind that this is not a percent-based scale. It's a rubric scale, a competency-based scale. So for every single grade, regardless of whether it's out of 5 points or out of 6 points, expected performance in every grade level is a 4. A 4 means that is proficiency at that particular standard, and a 4 means that they're writing as one would expect to be writing at that grade level. If they scored a 5 or a 6, that would be they did something that stood out in a very good way. There was some above expectations for grade level writing, if you will. So pay attention for writing to the numbers, not to the percents. We want to look for 4s to show expected performance in each area. A 4 is good in this case. Also on the backside, at the bottom, there are improvement ideas for each particular subject as well. You'll see the exact same areas as above, and the feedback is specific to how your child did on the test. Each bold skill heading corresponds to the skills above. And after each of those corresponding skills, there's a little bit of a blurb about improvement ideas for your child based on how your child did. So let's take an example. For example, in science, we see readiness in interpretation of data and in scientific investigation, but a little bit of work could be done in evaluation of models, inferences, and experimental results. If we look at the improvement ideas, we can see ways they can strengthen what they already did well in the first 2 categories. But if we want to know also how to help them strengthen their areas where there is some improvement needed, we can just look to the improvement ideas for this particular category, and we can see the feedback that ACT Aspire would suggest based on what the test is asking. So we can get very specific feedback for the classes as a whole and for the children as individuals as well, which I think is really neat. So as far as how can we use this data, there is a crazy amount of reports that I can run on the ACT Aspire sites to get all the results and things. And I've run a bunch of reports, and we can see a whole lot of data, and we can use this data to help us plan our instruction. We can see, according to this test, where might some strength areas be for our school and for our particular classes, and we can see where are some areas that we need to make up some ground, and maybe we need to kick it up a notch a little bit. So with all that data, there is a lot of neat stuff we can do. Keeping in mind that this still is only one indicator of how your child is doing, but I think it's a very useful and very informative indicator for us to help your children grow academically in their studies at school here. So that was a lot of information, and I hope you were able to follow along on your children's ACT Aspire test results page. If you have any questions about this particular presentation, please reach out to me. There's my email address and contact information. The phone number is school's phone number. If you'd like to set up a time with your child's teacher to talk a little bit more about these test results and figure out some sort of action plan as needed, please contact your child's teacher as well. If you have any other questions, let me know, let your child's teacher know, and we'll be happy to work with you and help you out. Thank you for your time whenever you're watching this, and we'll see you soon. Bye.